Okay, so we see, I think we should wait a bit longer before we start. Welcome everybody. Thanks to the speaker for being with us. Okay. Just one more minute, so you hear my voice less, which is not important, so we can start at the right time. Okay, I'll start to say something so that we start with the presentations at the correct time. And so again, thank you for participating to this, in my opinion, important session organized by Emanuela Clementi of the Climate Center in Italy and myself from University of Bologna and the Decade Collaborative Center for Coastal Resilience. The session is Ocean Predictions from Global to Coastal Scale. And so you have read the abstract. I think we are in the period in which we can probably make impact with our forecasting systems. We have to accelerate the uptake. It's not good enough yet, at least in my opinion. But, you know, thanks to all your great work, we have made lots of progress in the past years, 20 years, I guess, particularly Ocean Predict, which has been following the development, international development, and now the UN Decade with Coast Predict and others, ditto, other important programs that will launch the forecasting probably farther out. And so this is, I'd like to remind you this comment from a Nature paper that is forecasting is a silent revolution, but it will be very beneficial for both users and the scientific community. Okay, so we start, and the first speaker today, we are happy to have with us Dr. Fraser Davidson, one of the pillars of operational oceanography in the world, and one of the people that has worked a lot in Ocean Predict in the previous programs. He works now for the Canadian Hydrographic Service, leading the development of e-navigation products, which is very important, very nice. And he, you know, he has been always Environment and Climate Change Canada scientist. Thank you. So, Fraser, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nadia. Do you see my full screen?
We see very well, yes.
Okay, perfect. I can't see that you see it, so I'll take your word for it. Well, thank you for the kind introduction. I'm going to just move my camera so I can see the screen. Oh, I'll leave it as is, sorry. So if I look to the side, my big screen's illuminated, so I'll just look on my little screen so you can see me while I talk. So I'll talk a bit about Ocean Predict and the forecast systems that we put out, but also to really mention this gain in maturity of the systems, which if you blink a bit or you go back, you know, a year later, you think things have advanced quite a bit. So it can be silent if you keep watching it on a daily basis, but it's quite dramatic if you go from on a website a year ago and then come back again and see the evolution of things there and the maturity of things there. So I am very hopeful in the decade that we'll advance a lot and that we'll have a very mature system in ocean prediction, but also as part of a full value chain. We can't do ocean prediction without being an integral part of the value chain. So from observations all the way to end users, and to be good citizens there and to be productive component of the value chain, the best practices and sharing those best practices, developing and sharing them is really important. It'll help with communicating across this value chain. So this is a diagram everybody's seen over the last 10, 15 years. It's just, again, what ocean forecasting is. It's the ocean conditions. It can be historic. It can be into the future a bit. And basically, it's every asset that we have to be able to describe the ocean, whether it's physics, the model, or the observations, how we combine them, work them together, etc., to produce the forecast is important. And other specialists and so on will talk about those fields. I'm providing more of an overview. What I've mentioned at the start was this integration into the full value chain. Here's a simple representation we have. WMO represents sometimes their value chain differently, etc. But in general, it goes from observations all the way to end user. And there's also a feedback loop through there to sort of see how things improve. Sometimes it's called a rolling review in WMO circles, etc. But the main thing is that we have strong linkages across these systems to be able to if we contribute, say, on the prediction system, it enhances the other boxes or the other components of this value chain, even the observations through programs like SynObs, etc., or projects like SynObs that we share in the decade. So the best practices are crucial to enable these sort of good communication in the across these boxes, but also within these boxes. And you'll probably see both examples being talked about today. So just about Ocean Predict, it's come a long way in the late 95, in the 90s. It was WOS was this big program, etc., to get a snapshot of the ocean in a 5-year period and then another 5-year period. And that led to GODE starting and so on, where it was really looking at daily ocean forecasting. And so that matured then and unto present with Ocean Predict. Covering basically the decade, which is a good coincidence. We're working towards integration of ocean prediction in a larger, more maturing framework under the WMO, IOC, GEO, etc., for operational ocean to cover the whole operational oceanography value chain. So it's not how well we advance the prediction systems, it's how well we do that, but as part of this whole value chain. And the whole value chain needs to advance for us to have impact that Nadia wants us to have, etc. Ocean Predict, or the groups engaged, are quite various. They go from oceanography agencies to weather agencies. And in some cases, the partnership with the weather agencies is embedded. In my case, I'm with Environment Canada, which is a weather forecasting agency, but we're also partnered with the Fisheries and Oceans Canada group and the National Hydrographic Service and so on to deliver things. But the operational side makes a big impact when we have the weather prediction people on board. Not that we can't do it without them, but in some cases it makes a lot of sense to align and move forward, etc. There's a wide variety of end-use applications ranging from fishing to oil spills, to search and rescue, to how's the surf going to be today, etc. And one thing also important as part of Ocean Predict, but is that we're connected to the various agencies, such as EUMETSAT and the CNES and ESA, etc. Also individually, like with our own agencies like Canadian Space Agency, etc. Those links to the observations are very important. And we also have linkages to ARGO and to GRIST and so on. So we're broken down in task teams, and just to say within those, there'll probably be best practices being developed. I'll let Fabrice talk about things later on in the presentation about the intercomparison and validation task team. But one thing to bring up as a theme is how do we move from research to operations? And that's sort of one flag at some point for our best practices. Each group may do it differently and have different standards, etc. But it's how do we work through what's a good, efficient transfer process? If we develop that, then we'll have a shorter time period from which we go from research to operations, which is always good. We have a new group in the last 2 years, which is the Ocean Predict Operational Systems Working Group, or OPUS for short. My co-chair, David Ford, can't attend today, but we're both looking at basically helping the group solidify ocean prediction systems, but by sharing and intercomparing things on issues, insight, experiences, best practices, evaluate that, transition methods from research to operations, evaluations and updates, etc. And then find common solutions and track evolution of the maturity of the systems, which we can communicate, but also do that in conjunction as other groups mature, like new observation systems, etc., and how they track into our prediction and through to end user services. One thing, and this sort of paradigm may change, but it's something we wanted to sort of illustrate a bit, is that initially in Ocean Predict, we started with the global systems, and the regional systems came on board, largely in part with Nadia, but also with Pierre Demey and Willy Kouraflou, with the COSTITI, or the Coastal Ocean Science Task Team. One thing to sort of show is, well, the global systems may be mature and they're very well linked to the weather forecast systems now. The user needs are more in the coastal, as you can see. And so while there's still strong user needs on the global level for various things like shipping, etc., there's a lot more variety of user needs. And this was shown by the DCC, a predicted ocean DCC, a huge variety and strong needs in the coastal area. It's mostly where people live. Nobody lives on the open ocean, but there's a lot of operations going on the open ocean. So it's just to sort of highlight that sort of difference in maturity and difference in need. And I think things are happening quickly in the ocean in the ocean decade to be able to growing the coastal systems, and they're getting mature very, very quickly. And I'll show some examples going forward. So this is something just by browsing the CMEMS catalog that struck me. And this is something 20 years ago when I started in ocean forecasting that I was sort of wanting to help with the fisheries and so on. And it's just an index provided by Sweden about the Baltic Sea cod reproductive volume for water. So that's the amount of water from a reanalysis perspective that has criterion suitable for growth or for reproduction success of cod, or Baltic cod in this case. Just the fact that the index exists, but also that it's well represented and described in this, well, what's quite a plethora of prediction output and products and so on. Some are value added, some are the straight systems, etc., coming out. But what I wanted to show and highlight here is, the importance of describing these products really well. Here you have examples of the end use cases and so on. But what I was particularly impressed about was on the blue market, under blue market bracket, is here are the end users, etc., and so on, or the types of end use, etc. And that's, very gratifying. But it also shows that from our perspective, as we mature, we need to document things a lot better, have our best practices, so that things behind or producing this stuff will be more readily accepted, but can also be challenged and checked out and tested by different groups for different things. So there's a need in best practices to share expertise and benefit from it. Also, particularly Jennifer Veitch spoke up to this one 2 days ago, which was help setting up new forecast systems. You can pull a page from the best practices, etc. The user confidence is very important, and become a better integrated component of the value chain. And there's other reasons too. So the best practices is good sort of to represent between the boxes. One of the things to highlight that's probably going to be needed soon or is being developed, but it's the use of observations, but the interconnect between the observations and the prediction systems. As you know, the ARGO systems is sort of, we really need to emphasize the importance of that, and that it's a critical nature to support all these services, etc. And having best practices for how we relate, how the ARGO groups or other observation groups can exploit the forecast systems is important, and that eventually through Ditto and things like that, wherever you are in the value chain, you can view the prediction output in your way, either from an ARGO single float perspective or from a prediction perspective, for instance. So the current push that we have in this OPOS working group under Ocean Predict and for FORSI is to develop best practices of ocean prediction system reporting, and it's basically to enable tracking of maturity growth, inform a broad base of groups, whether it's the DCC Ocean Atlas, whether it's the specialists like myself and others, or the end users. This base information will be very important, and it can be gleaned in different ways for different forums. And finally, this ORL index that Enrique has been pushing will be quite useful, as far as also would use the information we have in this best practice for the reporting to be able to ensure that the ORL can be defined, but also verified and validated. Thank you very much. Back to you, Nadia.
Thank you, Fraser. Very interesting. You touched upon many of the issues that require these best practices to be really addressed in the operational systems, and it's a crucial step in the next year. So thank you. So the next I forgot to say that if you have questions, please use the question and answer key at the bottom of the screen. If you put it in the chat, we'll look also the chat, but question and answer is better. And okay, so now it's time for Dr. Paolo Oddo. Paolo is a professor now at the University of Bologna. A lot of people know him. He has been a very important personality in building the Mediterranean forecasting system and all the regional and sub-regional systems, coastal systems in the past. And he's reminding us today of a very important issue that requires best practices for the coast, that is open boundary conditions. Paolo, please. Voice.
Your microphone is off, Paolo.
Yeah. Microphone is off. Yeah. Now it's okay. We cannot hear you. No. Maybe you have the voice turned off. Paolo is gone? Yeah, he went out and in. No.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Okay.
we can.
And can you see my screen?
We can see. Thank you.
So I can start. Thank you, Nadia, for the introduction. I see only partially my screen because there are a lot of ancillary windows open. I'll try to go through. So yes, like just Nadia say, I'm going to have a very brief talk on the relevance of what are the best practices, at least in my view, the best practice on lateral boundary condition, which is a key element for a reliable ocean forecast. Next. Fine. This is how I organized my short speech, brief introduction, some very practical consideration, because at the end, the lateral boundary condition is a practical option, a practical problem, what is available, a very brief overview of what is available, and then my advices on what could be the good practices to conclude. Where the problem comes from, or the issue comes from, is because we are using a limited area model to improve our representation of a specific region of the world. So if you don't want to simulate or study the global ocean, then you focus on a specific area. Among the other parameters that are affecting and driving the accuracy of your simulation or analysis, one of the key aspects is the proper working on the lateral upper boundary condition, because they serve as gateway to exchange information between the model and the surrounding ocean. So for all the information that want to leave the ocean, all the remote information that need to enter, we need that the lateral open boundary condition, they work properly. However, once you have a model, a limited area model with lateral open boundary condition, there are issues that you have to face. And I just summarized the source of these issues into instances. First is that naturally, I mean, intrinsically, there will be an inconsistency between the solution provided by your model, because you increased the resolution, you added the additional processes, you are using different forcing or whatever. So there is an inconsistency between your solution and the parent model solution. And then also because since your grid, I mean, physically end up there, the numerics cannot be as accurate as in the rest of the domain, and the inconsistency also as well, that usually you need to face with numerical instability. So I faced the lateral open boundary condition problem a lot of time ago. So the first thing that I done in preparing this talk is to check if this is still a relevant issue. And immediately I found out this more or less recent paper, 2020, from Capet and other friends. It's from Eurogo's perspective, that summarize the usage of limited area model in Europe for operational purposes. You can see here there is an explosion of the same plot. How many are just focusing on the European part? So I answered my question, and I said yes, it's still a very relevant problem, because we are more and more using limited area model, because the local expertise is very important and we want to focus on specific areas. So it's still a key. And then some practical consideration. We need to start from the fact that an exact solution doesn't exist. There is no way to have an exact solution to the problem. So during the year has been proposed and developed several practical implementation to the boundary condition problem. And the literature is very vast. It starts together with the literature of the modeling, both atmospheric and ocean. And this was very active, I would say, in the 70s and the 80s, but still there are recent publications on the topic. So since then it is a practical problem, the effectiveness of the specification adopted must be evaluated case by case. There is no a general rule, but must be evaluated with respect to the specific characteristic of the problem that you are dealing with. So also the solution is specific for the problem that you have. And what is my general consideration, practical consideration? We need to accept that from a mathematical point of view, the problem is ill-posed. There is no way. So, however, if the errors that are due to this ill-posedness of the problem are insignificant, are irrelevant for the flow, and especially for the space and time scale I'm studying, then for practical purposes, that specific boundary condition can be considered viable. So it's a good boundary condition. On the other hand, even if I apply the most sophisticated boundary condition, but then I have generation of reflected wave, or the external information is not able to properly enter in my domain, then the boundary condition should be not considered satisfactory. That's, I think, is the general rule to evaluate the quality of your boundary condition. So briefly, what are the options? The option, I mean, they cover a wide range of possibilities, from super simple schemes to other schemes that are more sophisticated, that they can be considered kind of approximation of our primitive equation, reduced physics approaches. Probably the most simple way is just a relaxation and nudge. So if we push this concept to the extreme, this means the imposition of the external data at the lateral open boundary. This is a very good way, but please keep in mind the general rule. If it's working, it's good. There is no a priori, I mean, judgment on the quality of the boundary condition, but it's only just the results. My overview on the scheme after the drastic imposition, I mean, I see two kind of relaxation of this imposition, which is also good to review the nomenclature of the lateral boundary condition, which is a nudging layer. So if just imposing, instead of just imposing the data at your boundary, you start in an area approaching the boundary where you start relaxing the local solution to the external solution. What you are doing, you are applying a nudging layer, and that has been proven to help a lot the robustness of the model to smoothly merge the interior solution with the external solution. Most of the time, this nudging layer, but also the more sophisticated, the reduced physics boundary condition, are complemented with what is called the sponge layer, and the name is self-explanatory. So basically, it's an area in proximity of the boundary where I artificially increase my viscosity or my diffusivity in order to increase the stability, and the increase in the stability mostly derives from the fact that I'm dumping out all the small scales that are characteristics of my limited area model and are not present in the external data. So reduce the inconsistencies and the difference between the two solutions. If we go to an approximation of the Navier-Stokes, a widely used boundary condition in the past was the affective boundary condition. So basically, there is the assumption that the properties approaching the boundary is affected with a simplified advection equation, where we usually use only the normal velocity to the boundary. So if it's an outgoing, then I let my information to leave my domain with my affective velocity. If it's an ingoing, then I can use the external information to force my model. But probably the most popular boundary condition, they are all derived from the Sommerfeld radiation equation, a very old equation in the 49. So the assumption there is the solution approaching the boundary propagate through the boundary in a wave-like form. And the simplest way, and see if I have my, here we go. So the simplest way is to reduce to a simple one-dimensional, where n, lower n, is the direction perpendicular to the open boundary with a phase speed. So the difference with the advection, and now we have a phase speed instead of an advection velocity. Or we can even use a more sophisticated form where we account also not just for the normal, but also for the tangents. So here the issue was how to compute the phase speed, and probably the most popular solution has been proposed by Orlansky to compute the phase speed in the case of the 1D using the internal value. So that can be done numerically, and if I have a 2D wave equation, I can compute both the phase speed from internal value. That has been elaborated during the year. One of the most important I want to mention is done by Miyakoto and Rosati, that they suggested to use external value when the phase speed is in the direction of entering my domain, while using internal value when the phase speed is in the direction of the information leaving my domain. However, it has been noticed that when the system switch from one state, one regime outflow to another regime inflow, that may create inconsistencies between the two solutions. To avoid this problem, the most sophisticated recent radiation conditions suggested to add a relaxation terms on the right-hand side of the equation, with a relaxation time that depend on the regime. So whatever is the regime, I always have a continuous communication between the two models to avoid that during time the two solutions may diverge, and so with a switch of regime they can become very, very unstable. The most probably robust in a physical sense boundary condition is still a radiation condition, has been proposed by Flader. The limit of this boundary condition is that can be applied only to the barotropic component. And the assumption here is very robust from a physical point of view. So basically there is the assumption that the two vertically integrated continuity equation from the parent, here these chords, the lower C means chords, and the fine resolution model are forced to be equal at the boundary. Why is a radiation condition? Because then if I assume that the tendency of my surface elevation propagate in a wave-like form, I can then solve for the barotropic velocity of my limited area model, and I can get what is here on the bottom left, a generalized version of the Flader boundary condition. Basically what it states is that the barotropic velocity normal to the boundary is equal to the barotropic velocity of the coarse model, normalized by a geometrical factor, the difference between the bathymetry and the surface elevation, and then all the difference in the two surface elevation are radiated in or out with a generic phase speed. If we assume that there are no difference in the bathymetry and the surface elevation, and this wave speed is the speed of free gravity wave, then we get exactly what is the Flader boundary condition, where we don't have anymore the geometrical term and we substitute C with square root of GH. Flader it's interesting because Flader proposes this solution in order to introduce tides in his limited area model. But then this solution has been proven to be very effective, very robust, even if there is no need to introduce additional processes to the lateral boundary, but just ensure a physical connection between the two systems. So the good practices, I thought about that, and I think that rule number one I had to mention is that when I started dealing with the topic of lateral boundary condition, there was a general rule accepted by everybody and suggested by the expert to the new one that were approaching the problem like me, and I summarize it like that: the farther away the better, distance is a key, and more distance is better. So the idea was to put your boundary condition as far as you can from the area of interest. I question myself if this is still true, and I will give you an answer in a couple of slides. But that was the rule number one, and I think it's still a quite important good practices.
Sorry, Paolo.
Yeah.
You have 2 minutes.
Yes, I'm done.
Thank you.
I'm done. Thank you. So even if we put the boundary very far away, there are some good practices that we can implement in order to increase the robustness. The first one is to deal with the geometry, try to avoid geometrical inconsistencies between the parent and the child model, and try to keep a continuous communication regardless the specific boundary condition we are using. Another very good practices that I strongly suggest to follow is to try to preserve the very relevant information. One example of that has been provided by Nadia and Zavatarelli in the past, was called integral constraint. Since you have to interpolate data from one grid to another grid, you can force the transport of the interpolated field to match the transport of the original field, being sure that you don't introduce artifact just due to the interpolation procedure. And always remember the rule number one, which is the practical consideration. If it's working, it's good. So I conclude, we need to accept the fact that the analytical solution does not exist. There is an intrinsic difference in the solution, and so an inconsistency between the two solutions. Practical consideration and good practices is, remember rule number 1, the farther away the better. Maybe we can switch nowadays as like a closer you are, higher is the risk, but I think it's still the best rule to apply. There are a lot of options available. Just choose the one that give you the best results. And in the last, it's in addition to the specific boundary condition, there are a bunch of good practices that you can always apply, like the geometrical consistency, preserve the relevant information, and try to keep a continuous communication between the two models. And I'm done. Sorry if I was late.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much, Paolo. I think this is really important to iterate and show it again and again in order to increase the number of downscaling that we need to make proper use of the global systems that are becoming mature. So thank you for a real nice overview. Now is the time for Dr. Fabrice Hernandez. Fabrice is another important figure in the development of operational oceanography. He has been part of Ocean Predict also from the very beginning, and his contribution has been great in the past to help us to find intercomparison methods between models so that you could understand maybe model errors and other things. So today he is here with us again, reminding us about this effort, quality control in ocean forecasting and intercomparison. So Fabrice, please.
Thank you, Nadia, for inviting me to participate to this workshop. I'm going to share right now my slides.
And while you share, I forgot to say, he is part of the very important laboratory, IRD, Laboratory for Studies in Geophysics, the Research and Development, the Institute of Research and Development. So I forgot to say, and I apologize, Fabrice, because I mean, you have been a real practitioner of equitable modeling and understanding. So thank you.
So I thank also Fraser Davidson that already presented the framework of Ocean Predict that was at the beginning a good day. And I want to highlight some concepts and priorities in terms of providing routine, reliable ocean description and provision for users. Of course, this is done with all the actions we are doing with Greg Smith from Environment Canada, my co-chair in the intercomparison and validation task team in Ocean Predict. One of the challenges, which is going to be one of the key factors in terms of evaluating the operational oceanography, providing information to users, is the fact that the ocean, unfortunately, even if we have more satellite, is still poorly observed and undersampled. So this is a key element to remind. The volunteer to document the quality of a solution, of a numerical solution from ocean model has started following the example of the atmospheric community when oceanographers in their labs try to address the realism of their numerical solutions when they were working on the very beginning of the ocean circulation modeling, and trying to understand in between different models, for instance, that were organized in different ways. For instance, here, in terms of consideration of the vertical coordinates. And these models presented different solutions. So obviously, the first thing that was done by the academic community in ocean circulation was just to put all together the models and start to intercompare. And intercomparing at that time was already an issue because you need to address issues concerning how to intercompare. Model grids are different, many things are different. And at that time, from the academic point of view, we started having elements for trying to better compare models and find which model, which solution is closer to reality. And when operational oceanography started, this is the slide presented by Fraser, we have systems that incorporated different aspects that were the model itself and all the elements that are going to make this model be efficient in running a long time, which are all these coupling with the atmosphere, coupling with the continent boundaries, having the good geographical representation of the model domain you want to represent, and so on. And because this model have some errors, bit by bit, assimilation techniques came to constrain the model toward more reality for having solutions that provide more reliable information to users. So we started this way in GODA, considering a system that had already a model part, a forcing part, and assimilation part. And one of the big issues is that the ocean is vast. And since the beginning, the only way we had to really refer on the reality of the ocean was to refer on observation. In this case, having the global observing system as a reference for evaluation. And we have two kinds of observation for the ocean, which are the one provided by satellite that now offer a really good coverage, global coverage, but that offer evidence and quantify the variables at the surface. And then the bunch of in situ observations, starting from the very beginning, sea campaign with ship, to now more dedicated system that are automatic, robot, or whatever, as you call it. But still, they are sparse and they are diverse in their different technologies. So we have this in one side to evaluate the quality of the product we want to use. And when we look at the systems, we are facing, in order to evaluate the systems, different aspects to consider. The first is going to be the fact that errors may come from the model itself. So we have to take into account that model error may come from the inner mechanism of the model, the forcing, the bathymetry, the initialization, the subgrid parameterization, numerical scheme, the nesting aspect that were presented right now by Paolo Odo. And these are going to contribute to making the model solution away from reality, as users may see from the beach, see something with their eyes. The second aspect we have to consider is the fact that these systems are constrained with assimilation techniques that are going to ingest some part of the observing system into the model equations in order to control the solution. And again, we are going to face limitation in the kind of assimilation techniques that are used, which are the representation of the data. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
The representation of the data, the assimilation techniques that may have errors, and so on. So this is a second kind of errors that might grow into the modifying the performance of the system. And not also that the data that are going to be used to construct the system won't be independent in order to characterize the errors of the system afterward. And then we have forecast, and forecasts are something that is going to be really expected from users in terms of prevision. And then we are going to look at the skill of this forecast in different ways. and characterizing the performance of the system. So one other aspect is that when you work on real time, then unfortunately you may have a reduced set of information in order to characterize the error of the system due to real time mechanism to provide good information into the GUIs that can be used to the evaluation. If now I want to address and characterize the different kind of evaluation we need to do when we consider operational oceanography, I would say that we need that first to evaluate and monitor the performance of the operational system and measure the impact of the observing system that is used, characterize the model errors, measure the data estimation efficiency. And this is for just knowing if the system works well. Then the system is going to deliver products. And again, for the products, you want to evaluate the accuracy of the products, and you are going to look precisely at the difference between products and observation, or look at how observation can be used into products. And you're going to look at the skill of the products. And you also refer on all the work you do on evaluating the past simulation like analysis that make you know better about the routine performance of the operational systems. So this is, I would say, the work as usual for evaluating operational oceanography and models in the labs. But then I would call that internal science-driven evaluation. But then because operational oceanography have users, one of the key issues is to provide timely, robust, and reliable products for the users and as cost-effective ways. And it means that also we have to evaluate the solution of the systems and the products considering their reliability for users. So this is, I would call, the external user-driven aspect of the evaluation. And this has been growing in terms of ways to do it, trying first coming from the weather forecast and climate assessment to look at the user-driven request in order to define what are the better way to evaluate the systems. Then we are challenged every day because these systems are getting more and more complex, and they are coupling now with different other components of the Earth system or the ecosystem. And there is also a diversity of products. We started focusing on the physical oceanography, but now we have the biogeochemistry and the Arctic and Antarctic sea ice aspect that are inside the operational systems that need to be evaluated. And we started also to propose to users, I would say, short-term forecast, typically less than two weeks forecast. But this is also moving toward longer-term prediction. And this has also to be addressed in terms of evaluation of the performances and the skill of this longer-term prediction. And obviously, once you have done that, you have to consider another aspect, which is your users that may be decision makers and talk to them. And this is also important when you evaluate the product. The way you're going to explain to users the reliability of your products and the performance of your systems. So to give you some information about the way we work since the beginning, we have been working in defining basic principles that are consistency, quality, performance, and so on, and that were addressed and documented in many papers, and that are summarized in the ETUFS guide produced recently in the frame of the DCC by Alvarez Franjul and colleagues, and also by recent papers that were written to propose, I would say, state-of-the-art in terms of evaluating the systems and intercomparing systems. And to give you some different aspects, that is a parallel slide from the slide presented by Fraser Davidson in terms of activities in the community. I would say that we started in GODAE to intercompare the system and evaluate the system with the first exercise that was published in 2008. And then starting in 2013, to work on dedicated comparison to observation and addressing the quality of a series of variables like sea level, SST, profile of temperature, salinity, and then sea ice and surface velocity. This is documented and we worked on doing exercises on that and publish these studies that offers a series of experiences to highlight the best practices. And in parallel, there was this aspect on looking by intercomparing analysis, where we learn a lot about the good ways to look at different variables. And finally, one good example in terms of evaluation of systems is what is done for more than 10 years by the European Community in the Copernicus Marine Service that routinely provides evaluation of the systems with different kind of metrics. So just the way we've been working for years is into the task team is to design metrics in common, implement in every center that metrics and compute the metrics that provides so evaluation on a given parameter or variable, and then work on what is quite demanding, the good ways to exchange technically that information among us, which brings to ideas of best practices, and then run a dedicated exercise of performance assessment altogether, test our technical proposition to address this issue, and then publish the results. For instance, here we design what we call the class 4, which are comparison to observation for different variables. Here are some slides that presents differences between models and temperature salinity at different depths from ARGO profiles and others. And we are looking at over time at the performances of the system, comparing the truth with would have been the skill performance of the system if we have used the performance, the persistency, or the analysis, and so on, and evaluating every system performance this way. Another example here is the evolution of the performance of many systems along time. I'm finishing.
Yeah.
Same thing for the CIs, for instance, deriving from what we are doing new variables in order to address the threshold and errors in the systems. Same things for drifters that are associated with the accuracy of the velocity field given by the different systems. And we can go into Lagrangian, derive Lagrangian metrics in order to evaluate how a system is able to reproduce application like search and rescue and so on. So just examples. And if I had to just add something, we are also moving in a world where we now work a lot with ensemble forecast. And this is important to address this issue because ensemble forecast is going to drive also new aspects in terms of how the ensemble is reliable, how the ensemble brings something closer to reality, how the dispersion of the ensemble provide information about the stochastics errors into the systems and so on. So this also is part of the things we are documenting and trying to provide information. So my take-home messages are the following. We have been trying to develop validation and verification approaches for years. And the best thing we have to do when we start a new system is to understand the information content and the products and the reference information we are going to use. And also, the second aspect, which is important, is the fact that we have to always address the evaluation, considering the users and the metrics we need to do for users and for their different applications. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabrice. Very comprehensive presentation, many important messages. So now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Alejandro Souza, who will bring us, who is from Centro de Investigación de Estudios Avanzados del Instituto Politécnico Nacional. Terrible, but I had to say it. And in Mexico, and he has been working with us long time, also during his stay in Europe. He is going to introduce us finally to the multidisciplinary aspects of ocean best practices. Thank you, Alejandro. Please.
Okay. Wait a second. Where am I?
You're on. You're perfect. You were full screen. Yeah.
You hear me?
Yes, we hear you. And before, yeah.
we're going here. I give thank you to Fabrice, Fraser, and Paolo to give us a perspective where you have everything pretty mature, which is the deep ocean. Yeah. And it's probably in the first world in Europe and in America, although we also had talks from other places, but it is very different when we get to the coastal region. And here I'm going to talk about the Yucatan Peninsula, or the Yucatan shelf, which is a wide shelf, which is about 250 kilometers wide by about 400 kilometers in the length. And it's an interesting place because you have several things happening here. You have along here, which is very important for the boundary conditions that Paolo said, is you have the Yucatan current, which is part of the Gulf Stream system, if you want, before it becomes a loop current. And this is very important for what is happening because it's probably the best example of shelf western boundary current interaction plays. And this is a microtidal area. So whatever I learned in the Northwest European shelf, it's different. And it's a region that it's quite productive. We have one of the largest fisheries of octopus. And we also in this area, we have a place where it's important ecologically because we have whale sharks coming every time, and it's touristy importance as well. So the other thing that we have, which makes it special and complicated, is that there's no rivers, but we have fresh water that comes from a karstic system, which is underwater. We have certain springs that we can see, but it doesn't account for all the fresh water. So we have to think and make probably sensitivity tests how to do it. This is a slightly well-known system, but it hasn't been studied into detail, and we haven't got any operational system working yet. But that's what we are doing here. That's why we're working with Ocean Predict into getting working. And but this is an example from the HICOM 1/12 degree currents. This is temperature, and this, as you see, the water is pretty hot all the time. This is summer, it's May, which is the dry season, and here, and it's hot. But you have this plume of cooler water. Our cold water or upwell water is about 25.5 degrees. So that's the cold water that we have. The rest of it will be 30 something. And what we have is that a nice part of physics where you have this western boundary current impinging into the shelf. And when it impinge into the shelf, you have effects in the bottom layer, and the bottom Ekman transport kick in and brings colder intermediate water from and rich nutrients from the Caribbean into the shelf, and it produces these big blooms. These big blooms appears to be important because they maintain the ecosystem in the area, and it's it somehow brings the nutrients that goes all around this place. So that's what we want to reproduce, and we want to see what happens. We have observed it in a couple of cruises. This is one of them in September 2011. This is when the 22.5 degree water surface, and it's in this area where you have an upwelling, and in this area which appears to be transport. What we have observed as well, that a lot of this upwell water really maintain below the very shallow surface mixed layer. The other thing that we have is that in the shelf, this is about a 50-meter depth in average. It's a very shallow shelf. And then you have a very quick transport. So this maintains the upwelling, and it has a healthy system in that sense. Sometimes you have effects of harmful algae and blooms, which is the other thing. So here's a cartoon of what is happening, a schematic of what is happening. You have the Yucatan current coming here. It crashes into the shelf, and you have this midwater really surfing in and getting into the shelf, and it bringing nutrients into the euphotic zone and growing into nice chlorophyll. And we can see some points here of the typical on these screws that we showed how the concentrations of nutrients were, and we have like the largest concentrations of nitrates in this upwell area. We also have ammonia, which I think is because we have this big city here, Cancun, which all the tourists were producing that probably. And but we have like less silicates and phosphates. And then what we see is kind of this area, you have a production of fresh nutrients, and then here the production that you have is from recycled nutrients. So you'll have diatoms here, and then you'll probably have dinoflagellates. One of the interesting things, this is looking at models and models that are available. This is the highest resolution that I have found, because we're still developing ours, but it's where's the, no, I have to get out of this. There you go. So in this case is the MIT 1 nautical mile actually model, and it's salinity what we have, but we see how this water impinges here, this low salinity water impinges here, and it's all transported around the shelf. So you have a transport that it goes from the upwell area all around the shelf, which somehow will introduce the nutrients. This model is compared with anything else I've seen, it produces a lot of smaller scale processes, which I'm not sure if it's the model because it's so high resolution and it's global, or it's true, but it's kind of things that we have to be looking into our future observations that we are developing. So the first story is we have an upwell area where you have diatoms, dinoflagellates, and the nitrate is not important. And then you have a transported area where you have dinoflagellates as the main bugs that were in the base chlorophyll, and you have some nitrate limitations in that area. Well, that's one part of the story. As I said, and you see how you have the looking at long-term data from this is Nemo Orca from NOC, 50 years of data, and you can see your first mode is pretty much, and the surface temperature is pretty much related to seasonal cycle, but you have again this clear cooler water going down here, which we think it's related to the upwelling. We will have to do. I will have to look in detail on how it looks in the lower levels, because this is pretty much dominated by the heating. One of the other things, like in mode 2, you have very little variability explained. You have a lot of kind of variability that is important and present. And if we look at what happened with the currents, we can look at the spatial UF of the current of the same model, and we see how the first mode it produces a resemblance of your mean Yucatan current, and it will tell you how it turns and enhances. And this is important to drive that flow that we see. Why? Because as we get closer and the current gets closer and stronger, closer to the shelf and stronger, you'll have good upwelling. If it goes further away and probably weakens, you won't have upwelling, and probably if you get a counter current, you might even get downwelling. So that's one part of the story. The other part of the story is this underground water. The underground water, Yucatan, which is the largest city around here, about 1 million people and growing, and it's also full of industrial pig farms and poultry farms. It's about 20 kilometers. There's no proper treatment to the sewage, so all that goes in, and it somehow reaches our coastal area. This is observations that Dr. Herrera Silveira has been carrying around 20 years in the very, very coastal area, measuring nutrients, oxygen, chlorophyll, and everything. And you can see how it kind of varies how the quality of things are. We have middle nitrate in yellow pretty much everywhere, so it's fair, it's no good. It hasn't got bad in this particular case, but it can get bad. You have areas where oxygen it become critical as well, which is what we see when we have these caramel algal blooms. And we know that this is human. There's a clear example in here. This is a very unique data set that I've seen that I love. It's published by Martinez Casals 2 years ago, and it's caffeine. There's only one place where caffeine can come in a region where you don't produce coffee, and that's humans. Yeah, and we can see in all our lagoons I mean, the very coastal area, we have kind of bad and detectable measures of caffeine. So we have nutrients, we have water coming from human waste into our system. So we have to look in detail to that and how does that affect things. One of the ways that this affects is these caramel blooms, which part of my title is finance, because that's in Spanish, which is floraciones nocivas. And I forgot to translate it when I wrote the title, sorry. But this is the last ones we have had from 2001 to 2022. And it's been 4 different phytoplankton that have been characteristics. Most of them have, well, all of them have influence of coastal kind of algae, kind of phytoplankton, which is from coastal origins. In 2003, we had influence from marine influence. So, in somehow, we are looking at these human nutrients or these anthropogenic results of the farms are important into what's happening with the algal blooms. This is important because look at here, the fisheries were closed for 150 days. That's really important in this region. This one in 2022, which was the last one, it was closed only 25 days, but it was at the beginning of the octopus season. So that has another big impact to the fisheries. And it had impact into the octopus reproduction as well. And this one I know particularly. So it was only not a bad fish year, but the 2023 was a bad production. So it was also a bad year. So this is the kind of things that we will eventually would like to be able to predict and to get transmitted to our fisheries partners.
Alejandro, if you might, 1 minute more.
Okay. Well, I'm finishing now. Then, what we are dreaming, or this is the dream, or what we're working towards, and hopefully we get it through our government and IO Caribe and help of Global Coast, is we want to make an observational an observatory will have permanent moorings, which I will be looking at things. We have coastal areas with coastal measurements, which will be easier. We also will obviously have all the satellite data and the models, developing our model. And if we come to that, we're starting from scratch a lot. We have certain observations that we are doing continuously, like that one, and we have some small cross sections. But we want to start with a digital observing system, like a twin, using what we have from Copernicus and other areas to get the forecast of what is available and put it into the public so they get used to use it and get that. From that, we are working into downscaling the models, and we are doing this a strong collaboration with CMCC, with Nadia and Giovanni. And we're also working with UCLA to get the ROMS model, so we'll have at least 2 models working in real time there. And we are working like with new observations. As I say, we're trying to get to build an observatory there where we have data there that we can assimilate in our model, because that will be something I think crucial to have the correct position of the Yucatan shelf. So. With this, I'll leave you with the dream. Thank you.
Thank you, Alejandro. Dreams are the best, and normally they are realized when they are so well described. And so we now go to the next and last talk of the day, and is from Dr. Lorenzo Mentaschi, who is also a professor at the University of Bologna. And he looks at the problem of projections instead of forecasting. So we need to take on board the oceanographic community to go and do projections at the relevant space and time scales. So Lorenzo, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nadia, for the presentation. You can hear me, right? Okay. Now I share my screen.
Yeah, we can.
I share my screen. You can see my screen now?
Yes, we can. It's not full screen.
Yes.
Now we see the presentation mode. Yeah, now it's okay.
Okay, perfect. So, as Nadia, with her kind introduction said, we are going to speak about the projection of biogeochemistry, in particular projected extreme oligotrophication of the marine ecosystems of the Adriatic Sea. This research was developed in the frame of the AdriaClim project, which has been a European project funded by the European Commission in collaboration between Italy and Croatia, which was a very big project in general from a modeling point of view. The challenge was the development of a comprehensive modeling chain able to reproduce all the relevant aspects of the climate of the Adriatic Basin, and then using this model to assess the impact of climate changes at Adriatic scale. And this was a necessary step because we know that these global models that there are, like the CMIP6 or even the Cordex, which are higher resolution but still much larger scale, lack the resolution needed to disentangle the processes of such a small basin like the Adriatic Sea. So you can see here that this modeling chain is quite comprehensive. We had an atmospheric model, which was used to downscale the atmospheric conditions down to 6 kilometers of horizontal resolution with 60 level. A very big contribution was a hydrological model, which was used to simulate really a lot of catchment areas, like 140, more or less, catchment areas in the Adriatic Basin, which is a very high number, and I wonder how there can be so many catchment areas in the Adriatic Basin. Then a ocean circulation model, in particular NEMO, was adopted with a horizontal resolution of 2 kilometers and 120 levels, vertical levels, and then both waves and biogeochemistry. I think yesterday, Giorgia Perry explained to you the ocean downscaling, the ocean model, and its results. Here we'll speak about the biogeochemical projection. For this task, we use the BFM model, which is an established community model. BFM stands for Biogeochemical Flux Model, and it is a model based on the living and non-living functional group approach with variable stoichiometry, which is quite a widespread approach to model these kind of things. And also, as the name of the model implies, what is model is the fluxes of constituents between a functional group to the other. So, for example, from inorganic nutrients to classes of phytoplankton, zooplankton, dissolved organic matter, and so on. And this model is able to reproduce all the main features of the pelagic and benthic lower trophic levels. Now, this model is essentially just a biogeochemical reactor. So it was coupled with a transport model. In particular, here we used the NEMO model. It can be compiled in order to be just a Eulerian transport model. And in this couple, essentially, the transport model models the advection, the movement of the constituents across the basin, whereas the BFM models the biogeochemical reactions. And here we can see a bit in this scheme how it works. We have a set of input variables, which are in particular the circulation data, in particular the currents, the horizontal one and the vertical one, the data of temperature and salinity, the vertical diffusivity, the surface water balance. Then we need clearly the shortwave radiation and the wind speed, all the data coming from the rivers that were duly modeled using the hydrological model, and also lateral boundary condition, and also the nutrients were imposed in the rivers. So we imposed lateral conditions of nutrients both in the rivers and coming from the southern boundary layer. Now, just one slide to explain a bit how the climate experiment was set up. Essentially here in this experiment, we use a single Med-Cordex model. And the reason of this limitation is that this was the only model that provided all the data needed for the atmospheric downscaling. Then the ocean forcing for the biogeochemical model was provided by the ADRIACLIM NEMO model that was illustrated to you, explained to you by Georgia yesterday. The river forcing was provided by the ADRIACLIM hydrological model. And then we ran the model on a baseline scenario from 1992 to 2011. And in a future scenario period, the RCP scenario that was used was RCP 8.5 from 2031 to 2050. Activity that was carried out after running the model was a comparison between model and observation on the baseline period, that is between this comparison was done versus climatological satellite observations of surface chlorophyll concentrations and versus the climatology of chlorophyll, oxygen, phosphate, nitrate, and silicates provided by EMODNet, which is based, essentially, is a climatology based on field observations. And also to assess the ability of the model to reproduce correctly the quite diversified ecoregions that there are in the Adriatic Sea, we carried out a classification of the ecoregion using a classification methodology, in particular a K-medoid algorithm. For those who don't know, the K-medoid is an algorithm similar to K-means, but essentially it is developed in a way that it allows for the use of customized metrics. And here we developed a customized metrics based on the physical and chemical properties of the water. And using this classification method, we were able to essentially clusterize ecoregions of the Adriatic Sea that are quite consistent also with previous study. In particular, this area in the northwest, which is nutrient rich, and we call it northern estuarine, and it is dominated by the regimes of the rivers of the Po Valley, then other coastal ecosystems, and then also ecosystem in the less coastal, let's say, and more dominated by oligotrophy. And as for the comparison with the satellite observation, you can see them here. In particular, on the top, there are the satellite observations of chlorophyll. And here, there are the concentration reproduced by the model. So when we saw this for the first time, we were not very happy because you can see that essentially the concentrations of the satellite observations are significantly higher than those of the model. And here I must say, on one hand, we are able to reproduce correctly the fact that, for example, this area is nutrient rich, whereas these areas are oligotrophic, but the concentration of chlorophyll is significantly lower than that reproduced by that provided by the satellite observations. However, when we compared with the EMODNet climatology based on field observation, we find a very different picture. In particular, here you can see the comparison for different ecoregions that were highlighted in the clusterization, in particular the northern estuarine, the northern mesotropic, Italy center-south, which is the coastal region in southern Italy, and southern deep, these four regions. And the comparison is done for 2 seasons, in particular winter and summer. And here the thick blue line is the vertical profile reproduced by our model. And the red dots are the observation of the EMODNet climatology based on field observations. And you can see that our profiles of chlorophyll here are very well aligned with the ones with the field observations, essentially. Whereas the concentration provided by the satellites is this green line, which is essentially much higher. So we can see that there is an inconsistency between the measurement in the northern estuary of the concentration of chlorophyll between the field observations and the satellites. And this is essentially happens more in the coastal areas, whereas in the more oligotrophic areas, there is more consistency between satellite observation and the field observations. And then anyway, in general, we can see that we do a fair job in reproducing the profiles of chlorophyll with respect to the EMODNet climatology, with caveats, because, for example, in summer, there is a generalized tendency to model a too pronounced deep chlorophyll maximum in many regions. We are doing a very good job in general with the oxygen, in reproducing the concentration of the oxygen. And instead, there is more uncertainty in our ability to reproduce correctly the concentration of nutrients, in particular of phosphate and of nitrate. Now let's come to...
If you can, 2 minutes.
Yes, let's see what are the results of the projected changes that we have. In particular, also yesterday, Georgia showed that we, in our projection, in our model, we have a very strong decrease in river discharge with, for the Po valleys, amounts to about 40%, which is a lot. And this is what drives the impacts on biogeochemistry, especially in the northern part, which is dominated by the regime of this ecoregion. So in general, what we see is deoxygenation, which is consistent with the increase in temperature. We see acidification, which is more pronounced in deep areas than in coastal areas. And this is probably due to the fact that anyway the rivers transport alkalinity that somehow buffer the acidification in proximity of the river mouths, in proximity of the estuaries. There is a very strong decrease in primary production and chlorophyll concentration in estuary and coastal areas. As we can see, there is essentially related to this decrease in river discharge, we have that the concentration in chlorophyll is halved, essentially, in the northern estuarine area. In the estuarine and coastal areas, the change is driven by a projected strong decrease in river discharge, while in the southern deep area is more dominated by the changes in circulation and by what comes from the boundary condition. Some final remarks. The interest of this study is that we show the possible consequences of extreme reduction in discharge of the rivers of the Po plain. And this is an actual topic, because now in this year we saw that the discharge of the Po River is still normal, but a couple of years ago we had for a very long period a very low discharge. And anyway, this ongoing climate change is anyway leading to a kind of imbalance in the climate that can possibly lead to this kind of consequences. And also it must be said that a tendency to oligotrophication in the Adriatic Sea is not something that simply arises from this study, but is a very well documented tendency in the last decades in the Northern Adriatic. Clearly, these results comes with the limitation that we use the single climate model, which means we cannot be confident in this projection. So its validity is more like a what-if scenario. And indeed, we intend, this limitation was due to the fact that this was the only model that provided all the data needed. And we aim to tackle this limitation in the future projects. And finally, I would say that excessive oligotrophication can be a hazard, especially in ecosystems that are long evolved to be supported by high trophic conditions. And it can lead to them becoming unproductive and with declining biological resources. This research was published, and also to read the paper. This is all. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Lorenzo. So this is, I think, the ultimate goal at the end, and everything that Lorenzo has shown you, even if it is in a projection kind of view, depends on the development of the lateral boundary conditions and the fact that there are models at the larger scales that allow you to have the limited area modeling. So this is an advanced modeling setting, but I think it will be proven to be very useful for the continuation and improvement of our models. So thank you again, all the speakers, very interesting. And I would like now to take, we have 3 minutes. Okay, so 3 minutes is a bit short. Before, I mean, it was thought to be 10 minutes, so we're not so late. If the people can stay another 5 minutes. We have questions, right, that we wanted to answer. And I'm asking, you know, for some of the presenters, if they want to say something about one of the open questions. If people have suggestions for the question, please put them in the question and answer or the chat at this point. And we will definitely consider them in the final conclusions of this meeting. So the first question is, what are major challenges in relation to the creation, use of best practices in ocean forecasting? Now, who would like to give a short answer to this? Please. Fraser, come on, help us.
Okay, I had to find my unmute. So the major challenges in best practices is, I mean, it's always important to know why you want to document this best practice and for whom and so on. And so internally, like a group like Fabrice's IVTT, we can internally write a best practice about, you know, how we do verification and so on. And that's, well, I won't say very straightforward, but after discussion that'll get done. Where the challenge is a bit between groups, like if you look at the value chain between groups, like the observing people and the prediction people, they have 2 different sort of narratives of, you know, what they're looking for, etc. And it's to ensure that there's best practices that allow us to kind of concretize how we communicate with them or that we're producing something that's also useful for them or interpretable by them, and vice versa, so that they're doing stuff in their best practices or following them, and we benefit from it on the prediction side, or we understand what's going on, etc. So it's really, when the best practice draws two communities together, it's a very, very good thing, but it's also a challenging thing because you're coming from different backgrounds and different, how do you say, values or different needs and different ways of looking things, basically a different culture, right? And so it's what's this Esperanto language we need for our documentation between these two groups.
I hope we will do better than Esperanto, because I was trained in Esperanto and it didn't work very well. But I totally agree. I was informed that we cannot go over. So I would like then to say that it was extremely interesting, and I think we should do more of this. Let's hope the next year we have edition number 2 of Ocean Forecasting Best Practices. And I thank you all for coming and giving such interesting contributions.
Thank you to all the organizers. I think it's been great, all the workshop. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.